Hello. In this video, we're going to go over Cartesian skepticism, and we're going to be focusing on Descartes' first meditation. So the primary purpose of Descartes' meditations is to establish a firm foundation on which to justify all of his beliefs. So the way Descartes is going to do this is by mainly identifying those beliefs which are impossible to doubt. In other words, indubitable beliefs. The idea is establish indubitable beliefs or identify indubitable beliefs, and then from those, you can use those to justify other beliefs. In the first meditation, Descartes primarily focuses on the methodology that he develops in order to identify those indubitable beliefs. So that is what the first meditation is about, and that's what we'll be focusing on. How is it that Descartes goes about identifying those indubitable beliefs? So here's the kind of big picture, right? So Descartes is introspecting and he's kind of taking an inventory of all of the beliefs that he has. So he has beliefs about mathematics, beliefs about scientific conclusions, beliefs about the nature of God, and so on. And what he wants to do is he wants to introduce some sort of skeptical hypothesis into this inventory of beliefs to see whether or not those beliefs can withstand the skeptical hypothesis. If they, in fact, cannot withstand the skeptical hypothesis, then what Descartes concludes about those beliefs is that they are not indubitable. So he kind of puts them to the side. And the idea is to go through this process, right? Testing all of his beliefs, or at least categories of beliefs, against these skeptical hypotheses, and in order then to see what he's left with. And whatever he's left with, those are the beliefs that Descartes will have identified as indubitable beliefs. And then from that point on, Descartes can start to build the rest of his epistemology. So one thing to note is that Descartes is using skepticism in order to identify these indubitable beliefs. But he's not, in fact, an actual skeptic. He's not actually questioning the beliefs that he has in order to get rid of them forever. Again, he's questioning these beliefs to identify the indubitable beliefs and then bring back those beliefs that he had to put to his side, the ones he identified as not being indubitable. But now he is using the indubitable beliefs as a foundation for justification for other beliefs in order to ensure that the beliefs he does have about, say, features of objects in the world, features about math, about the nature of God, are actually set on a good foundation. So unlike being an actual skeptic, what Descartes is known for is being a methodological skeptic. So he's using a sort of methodology via skepticism in order to kind of construct this sort of epistemology. So now, in order to understand his overall project, we have to first understand what is meant by a skeptical hypothesis. So a skeptical hypothesis with respect to some set of knowledge, some set of propositions that are known, is itself a proposition or a story that, if true, meaning the skeptical hypothesis, would mean that the propositions that we claim to know, in fact, we wouldn't know. So for example, suppose that I know, right, or I claim to know that my American airline flight leaves at 1 p.m. sharp from LAX, and I have good reasons to believe it, and so on, right? If I were to introduce a skeptical hypothesis kind of adjacent to that set of beliefs, something like, well, it is possible that a disgruntled American Airlines employee will sabotage operations and thus delay my American Airlines flight, right? If this were true, then it could not be the case that my belief or or what I claim to know, that my American Airlines flight leaves at 1 p.m. sharp, it would not be the case that I actually, in fact, could know that. So let us look at the general structure of kind of what Descartes is doing, and then we'll go back to the American Airlines example to look at the specifics. That way you have a better understanding of this. So we can present this in the form of an argument. And the argument goes like this. So premise one, if I am justified in believing some proposition, that P, right, say my American Airlines flight leaves on time, then it entails or it follows that I'm also justified in believing that not SH, namely the skeptical hypothesis that would bring the proposition that I'm said to believe into question, right? If it turns out that I am not justified in believing that skeptical hypothesis, meaning that not SH, right, then by modus tollens, it follows that I am actually not justified in believing that initial proposition, right? Again, if I am justified in believing a particular proposition, some trivial proposition like my American Airlines flight is going to leave on time, then I should be justified in believing that all skeptical hypotheses that would bring that into question are false. But if I'm not justified in believing that those skeptical hypotheses are false, right, then I'm actually not justified in believing that initial proposition. So here's how it looks like in relation to our example that we gave, right? So again, the kind of trivialish proposition that I'm set to believe is my American Airlines will leave on time, say, at 1 p.m. sharply. We can imagine that I have really good justification for holding this belief. I've seen my itinerary, I talked to like the person in the front desk and so on. But now suppose that somebody, introduces the skeptical hypothesis, right? So I claim, not only do I believe that my flight will leave on time, I'm pretty sure of it because I have all of this, evidence that makes me hold this belief pretty firmly. And then I have, a jerk friend who says, well, how do you know that, there isn't some sort of disgruntled American airline employee who will sabotage operations? Like, can you disprove that, right? If I'm not able to disprove that, right, then it has to follow just from modus tollens, but also like just epistemically, right? That if I cannot disprove that there is not a American Airlines, a disgruntled American Airlines employee who is going to sabotage operations, then it has to be the case that I actually don't believe or I'm not justified in believing that my flight is going to leave on time. So here's the general strategy once again, right? Descartes has all of these beliefs. He's trying to figure out which of these beliefs are indubitable or kind of beyond doubt, right? And the way he's going to do that is by introducing a skeptical hypothesis that if this were to be true, then Descartes would not be able to hold said belief. So the strategy is, right, if in fact I am justified in believing a particular, say, proposition or set of propositions, then that would entail that this has to be false. But if there's resistance, right, where this can't immediately be disproven or put to the side, then that means that belief in question cannot actually be held, or we're not justified in holding that belief. And so Descartes is going to go through kind of these general categories of beliefs about math, about the existence of God, properties of objects, and so on. And again, with the ultimate goal to identify those beliefs that cannot be doubted. So, once again, for clarification, right, the sort of skeptic that Descartes is, that we can attribute, the sort of skepticism that we can attribute to Descartes is what's known as methodological skepticism. This is a method in which propositions are questioned as a means of gaining a better understanding of what we already hold to believe, and thus, what we ultimately know, right? Whereas just epistemic skepticism, the kind of skepticism that we are perhaps accustomed to whenever a friend says, well, how do you really know that, right? That's just being skeptical about propositions themselves. So this is just the belief that, there's nothing that we know or very little that we cannot know just because we don't have the ability to actually acquire propositional knowledge. But that's not what Descartes is going to conclude. In fact, at the end of the Meditations, Descartes concludes that we know a lot of things. We know a lot of things about ourselves. We know a lot of things about the nature of the world. We know a lot of things about mathematics. We know a lot of things about God. So he's definitely not an epistemic skeptic. He's just using skepticism as a tool to establish that firm foundation. So now, what are the skeptical hypotheses that Descartes uses? Well, he uses 3 of them. And in reality, he only needs 1. He really just needs this evil genius hypothesis. But these are the 3 hypotheses that Descartes uses: the deceptive senses hypothesis, the dream hypothesis, and the evil genius hypothesis. So let's look at the first hypothesis. The deceptive senses hypothesis is the following, right? This is supposed to be a hypothesis that brings into question beliefs about the qualities of objects. It states that Look, in the past, Descartes says, our senses have misinformed us about qualities of objects, right? So if in the past we've been misled or misinformed based on our senses on qualities of objects, then who is there to say that we aren't being actually misinformed or misled by our senses right now, right? So if I were to see, I'm looking at I think I see an orange mug in front of me, so I form the belief there is an orange mug in front of me, but maybe the light in the room that I'm currently at is not optimal, and in fact it's actually not orange, but it's rather red, right? And then when I turn the lights on in the room that I'm in, I see that it's really a red and not an orange. So my senses kind of deceived me or misinformed me or were unreliable in the belief that it induced. So that seems to be a hypothesis that would bring into question, if successful, again, just beliefs about the qualities of objects. But it's not successful to bring into question other sorts of beliefs, say beliefs about the existence of objects themselves. So even if I am incorrect about the qualities the mug has, I still am perhaps correct about my belief that there is a mug in front of me. And also it doesn't bring into question beliefs about mathematical truths, right? So there's still just one object in front of me rather than two, say two mugs. So then because of this limitation, Descartes introduces another hypothesis, the dream hypothesis. And in the dream hypothesis, Descartes says, when dreaming, it is often sometimes difficult to tell whether one is dreaming or one is, not dreaming. So what is real and what is actually a dream. In fact, you've probably have had those dreams where you don't actually know you're dreaming and you wake up, you're like, oh my God, I really thought I was a millionaire, right? So Descartes says, on what grounds can we say that we are in fact not dreaming right now? So I'm looking at this mug in front of me, right? But I've had dreams before where there's mugs in front of me and I thought those mugs were real. And then I wake up and I'm like, oh no, that wasn't actually a mug. I was just dreaming. So again, in this situation, what can I point to or how can I actually disprove that I'm not dreaming, right? If I'm not able to do that, then it follows that I actually cannot hold my belief that there's a mug in front of me. And so if this hypothesis is correct or strong, right, if there's no problems with it, then at best what it would do is bring into question beliefs about the nature or existence of physical objects, namely all of physical objects that we perceive, or at least that we infer to perceive via other senses. What it would not bring into question, Descartes says, are beliefs about mathematical truths, because even in your dreams, right, if you're kind of dreaming about mugs, you can still count those dream mugs, right? They're not real mugs, but they're still, there's still a certain number of mugs that you can kind of count, and they're quantifiable, right? So in order to kind of account for how to, test against these beliefs, Descartes introduces his final hypothesis, the evil genius hypothesis. And this is really the only hypothesis that Descartes needed, because this hypothesis would not only bring into question all of our beliefs about the qualities of objects, which is what the deceptive senses hypothesis is supposed to account for, and not only would it bring into question all of our beliefs about the physical world, which is what the dream hypothesis is supposed to account for, again, if at all, but this will bring into question all those things, plus even, beliefs about kind of the nature of mathematics and mathematical truth. So the evil genius hypothesis goes as follows. Descartes says, look, it's possible, right? Again, it need not be the case, but it's possible that there could be a being just like God, right? So think of God and all of his omnipotence, all of his omniscience, right? All of his sovereignty. The only difference between that God, say the Abrahamic God, and this evil genius is that this evil genius is evil, pure evil. And this evil genius only exists for the sole purpose of deceiving us about the existence of, or the nature of reality. So, and if this were the case, right, and we cannot disprove the existence of this evil genius, then what follows is that all of our beliefs about the nature of reality, the properties of objects, mathematical truths, right, we would actually not be justified in believing those things, because it's possible that this evil genius who is evil has the power to be deceiving us. So maybe right now I believe that I'm sitting in a chair recording this video, but it's possible that this evil genius could be just deceiving me about me being here. And in fact, I'm somewhere else. Okay,